Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about 15-minute cities. Now, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and the standard conga line of propaganda goons are all talking about the 15-minute city in a way that suggests that it's going to be forced upon an unwilling populace, whether gradually or through whatever means. But it can't be that far away, and the intersecting points will be the use of energy restrictions, the climate change. The world's going to end if we don't do it. And if you don't go along with it, we'll kill you or imprison you or tax the crap out of you or something. There'll be various. I think it's going to end up something along the lines of a sort of a slightly benign but not very benign concentration camp type model of herding humans into a small area. But let's just have a look at this idea of a 15-minute city. It potentially could work in areas of already very dense population. Now, the definition of a 15-minute city seems to have sort of a bit of rubber in it. Is it 15 minutes travel on public transport from one extremity, the eastern extremity to the western extremity of the 15-minute city, or northern to southern, or whatever? Is it 15 minutes travel from the centre point? Is the public transport horse and cart, or is it high-speed rail, and so on? Now, the 15-minute city, in the case of, say, some of the high-speed rail I've seen around the world, then it could be 100 kilometres end to end, or even a little bit more. But it could be fairly extensive. You look at 100 kilometres north-south, 100 kilometres east-west, or going in a grid, or a circle or something. That's quite a large area. And if you look at, say, the United States, and you take in places, the heavily populated areas in the northeast around Philadelphia, New York, and up around there, you could create a number of 15-minute cities across the United States, Los Angeles and so on. Now, it'd be a bit different once you get out into the less populated areas, and it'd be much harder to create a 15-minute city there unless you have super high-speed public transport. I can't imagine the 15-minute city would permit people to live with independent transport, like your own motor vehicle or electric vehicle or helicopter or whatever the case may be. But so the shape of the 15-minute city, the details of, it's all very well to talk in broad brushstrokes of 15-minute city where everything you need is only 15 minutes away, whether it's a shop, whether it's work, so how do you actually achieve that? And what about people that don't live in a highly populated area? How do you move them into that area other than by threat, coercion, or at gunpoint? And that's a disturbing thought for the future. Or would you simply say, well, anyone who's not in the 15-minute city pays 90% tax, or will be refused all public services, or all public services will only be available in these 15-minute cities? So if you want to see a doctor or something like that, or you want to buy food, then outside of the 15-minute cities, you effectively live in this sort of persona non grata type area where no services or sustenance are available. It'd be interesting to see what methods of coercion are used. Can you imagine all the false flags that'll be going on, and all the propaganda and the lies that will all be told in order to make that happen? But let's assume for the moment that the 15-minute cities will just primarily be in areas that are already heavily populated. Now, again, you've got to see, how do you create those high-speed public transport links? How do they work? Are they going to be sort of rework existing public transport? Are they going to create above ground, and the overpass type concept? They're going to create monorails going above the housing, or there's some things that I've seen where they're talking about the 15-minute city will in fact be a 10-kilometre long, 1 kilometre high, 500 metres wide, high-rise building, and within that will be all the shops and all the transport and all the facilities that are needed, and you live in little shoeboxes in that area. Now, also, travelling to work, for example, there are some jobs where you actually need to be physically there to do it, but the amount of jobs that require that are diminishing. Is work going to be employment for whatever type of employment exists? Will that be people working remotely from their little shoebox, their home, or would it be something else? Would businesses be relocated? For example, would only the big multinationals be allowed to conduct business? And if so, how would they provide employment and things like that? So what would government employees do? So there are a whole lot of logistical and, again, the fine detail things to sort out there in this 15-minute city. I'm not sure it's practical. I don't think it could be done without massive levels of coercion, where the rule of law and due legal process are totally disregarded in pursuit of again, corralling everyone into effectively a concentration camp type situation. And whilst technically you wouldn't be under arrest, if you step outside the bounds of the 15-minute city, you'll suffer huge taxation penalties, which will allow the state to, the state will know that you can't pay them, and then will use that as a pretext to arrest you and throw you in prison or kill you or something like that. So I would think that would be the direction that they would go in, and that's certainly a trend, that suspending the rule of law, suspending due legal process. We're already seeing it now. Anything that gets in the way of the globalist project is already being treated with that harshness. And so we can assume that the 15-minute city will be, it won't be a natural or organic thing. It'll be forced on the people, again, through various brutish and nefarious policies without the consent of the people. We have to act because the world will end if we don't, and anyone who's against us is a fucking Nazi. It'll be that sort of thing. Now, there are some practical aspects of it, in terms of efficiency and traveling to work, the amount of energy that's needed to run one of these places, the centralized nature of once you've got that many people living in that small an area, it's very efficient to allocate space and energy and resources because so many people are so your economies of scale are very efficient in contrast to people living over a wide dispersed area where it's much harder and much more expensive to deliver services to them, whether it's energy or food or medical services or anything at all. So I see the efficiency side of it, but once you go down the path of the 15-minute city, you're effectively giving up on the individual. The individual liberties no longer exist. And so we need to realise, that for efficiency here, we're losing pretty much all our liberties on the other side of it, and what very few liberties remain would be tightly monitored, controlled, and surveilled by an all-powerful, effectively omnipotent state. So we need to sort of look at those, gains and benefits. If people could freely live in the 15-minute city and at their own choice, or not at their own choice, that'd be slightly different. But I don't think the future. Globalist controlled, globalist enforcing governments would do that, would allow that or permit that. They would want to gain efficiency through, as they would see it, the liberties we take away from you become an efficiency. So the multinational companies can deliver, in monopoly, oligopoly terms, their goods and services into the 15-minute city and have reduced, there's no competition, reduced distribution costs. You can be forced to use the goods and services of this or that monopoly, creating yet greater efficiencies as they would see it for profitability. And effectively, the people would live in a socialist society with only the people at the very apex permitted to live what would be a capitalist or a form of capitalism, in as much as they would be allowed to have a private ownership, but no one else would. So I see a dark dystopian future really in the 15-minute city, but we'll see how it plays out. I think it's an inevitable. You can see the thinking and the propaganda sort of gravitating towards this. I mean, you could see it like if you look at some of the 1950s novels written by sci-fi novels written by like Isaac Asimov or the Philip K. Dick, and who wrote the Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the basis for the Blade Runner movie. You look at their novels, and I remember reading them as a schoolboy and thinking, "Oh, fuck me, that's dystopian. That'll never happen." And I look at them now today and think, I'd be surprised if it doesn't happen. Not necessarily tomorrow or the next day, but certainly over the next 50 years. And as our liberties and rights, legal rights, political rights, democratic rights are being eroded at a high speed, it won't be very long. I would think, it'll within the next 10 years where Western governments will no longer, go through the pretense that the law exists or individual rights exist or democratic rights. I don't think they'll even bother with pretense anymore. Arbitrary arrest and, you're a Nazi. I think that'll just be widespread, and it'll be the pretext for, not that there won't be public relations, but the government will own all the media machinery, so that this idea, it'll be dressed up as somehow as a virtuous, noble enterprise by your all-loving, omnipotent government. But that's just a little talk about the 15-minute city and where I think it could possibly go. But I am thinking now that they're quite determined to pursue this course, and how it'll happen is really the only issue. Building these massive skyscrapers that go a kilometre into the sky and 15, 20 plus kilometers long, these sort of things, and everything's within that. I think that's a bit of a jump. I mean, the public works involved in that would be colossal and monumental. I wouldn't write it off entirely, but I think it'll more be areas that are already intensely populated will be forced to have even more population. You can see it already. If you've got if you live in a 3-bedroom house and there's a couple, mum, dad, and one kid, then I think it's, well, what are you doing with that 3rd bedroom? Well, we're using it for storage. No. You've got to put someone in there, or we'll tax you double, or we'll give you a higher land tax, or we'll put you in prison every weekend. There'll be some sort of coercive measure to force more people to live in a given geographical area, and I think it'll happen along those lines, and then that'll be the basis for the 15-minute city. And there are areas in the United States, if you look at New York and say end to end in New York, or where find 5 or 10 million people, and then look at that and say, well, we can probably push another 2 or 3 million into that, and hey, that's only 15 or 20 minutes end to end from either side of the. So there are areas where you could create 15-minute cities, and I think that'll be the first cab off the rank, as it were. Being with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.